Before we start this episode of Krypton Report, I want to take a moment and just give a shout out here to our Patreon. I know what you're thinking. Gosh, everyone's asking for money, and I get it. But our Patreon is only $1. $1 a month. It helps us keep the podcast going. And what we do is we try to find interesting shows and topics and whatever we want to talk about. We've done, as of this little thing, our last recordings were on the Scream series. Brian and Tyler, that's me, do our own show where we record in the car, and it's kind of funny. And we talk about pop culture or whatever is going on. We also have the Supernatural podcast we've been reworking. It's taken on some time just because of life. But we do movie commentaries as well. It's something that James and I have done, what we used to do on the main show that we've started doing here. So for $1 a month on our Patreon, you can get those shows. There's at least 4 a month. Also, there's my movie pitch show that I do. But also, what we want is if you're a Patreon, you can come on. You can come on the main show if you want. Or if there's something you want to come on and talk about, we can do it as a Patreon special. So all I want is for $1 a month, think about chipping in, joining our Patreon, and you have a voice to be part of things. Follow the link in the link tree or in the show notes below, patreon.com/KryptonReport.
Part of the Press Play Podcast Network.
Look up in the sky. It's a bird. It's a plane.
This is Jason J. Lewis, the voice of Superman on Justice League Action. This is Mark Wade, writer of Superman Worldwide. You're listening to the Krypton Report.
Welcome to the Krypton Report, and it is Flash Week. That's right. We are in the next exciting chapter of Flash Week. And yes, I call it Flash Week because it sounds awesome, but it's kind of like Flash Week plus like 3 days. So don't hate on me. But this time, because I'm awesome, and I was like, if I'm going to do this the way I want to, I'm going to get awesome people with me. I have, and you've heard him before, and if you don't listen to his podcast, then that's poo-poo on you. But I have Mr. Anthony Desiadio. I almost said Desiadio, gosh. I almost like added some extra layers there. It's been a long day, people. And since I'm recording things out of time, it's been fun. But Mr. Anthony Desiato from Digging for Kryptonite, what's up, man?
Thank you for having me. I've heard a lot of different pronunciations of my name in my lifetime, so that's quite all right. What I found more than anything else, just as you just did a moment ago, people tend to want to add letters. It's like the name's already long enough. I found more often than not when it's mispronounced, it's adding aspects to it, but it's all good.
I just kind of slurred off the tongue here. I've been talking for a while, and it's just one of the behind the scenes of podcasting. I'm recording all these early. 1, because I wanted to make sure I got them all done. 2, I learned from Anthony. Anthony is the man who, as I joke often, he probably has 2024 already, halfway done recording. Because he likes to be prepared and be ahead, which is great. And so I'm trying to do that. But I'm recording this shortly after my trip, where I'm still kind of, not sure how much sleep I've gotten or what's going on or which way's up. Because it was like 72 hours of straight awakeness. But anyways, all that off the side, we're going to be talking about, for this day's episode installment of Flash Week, is the 1990s John Wesley Shipp pilot. We didn't have time to watch the whole series or dissect it, but we wanted to get our feet into it and the flavor and what that version of the Flash is and how that shaped us. And, talking with Anthony was exciting because Anthony had never seen it. And he was like, if you want to get somebody else, man, I was like, no, let's do this like this because I have seen it. I rewatched it for this. But coming in with his fresh eyes and talking about it makes it a little bit more fun than just two dudes talking about how they grew up or what they watched when they were younger with it. So it makes a little bit more of a, group effort here. And yes, I'm rambling because that's what I do. So Anthony, thank you. Thank you for joining us for Flash Week as we build up. On a scale of 1 to 10, how excited are you for the Flash film? As of right now.
We're going to start there. I guess I'll say maybe 6 or 7, I suppose. This is a whole separate conversation, but I guess I won't even get into the Ezra Miller of it all and all of that, but it's just the sort of thing where it has been so many years and so many false starts, so many delays. And now I feel like we're seeing this overcorrection and just this intense overhyping of the film. And I hope it's great. I always want these movies to succeed as an audience member and as a fan of these characters and this universe and everything. Like, I want it to be great. I never wish for a movie to fail, but I'm just starting to feel like, okay, how good could this possibly be? I just feel like people are being pretty hyperbolic about it, and maybe it's deserved. That's the thing. I reserve judgment until I watch it, but I'm curious, but it's not like I'm on the edge of my seat for this thing. I mean, what about you?
I'm pretty excited. It feels good. I love the Flash. He's kind of my number 2, 3 character. You know, it's Superman, and then, you know, Batman, the Flash are in there. So, you know, Sayla's super excited. So that kind of breathes into my excitement, seeing my kids actually be excited. Like, Solomon's really latched on to Michael Keaton as Batman. I think a lot of that happened when I took him to see the double feature of Batman Returns. He's really kind of enjoyed that version of Batman. So, you know, both the kids are excited, which, you know, really helps me get excited for it. It's just fun to be excited for something again and not come in with the negativity. You know, the whole Ezra Miller thing aside, I try to look at it like he's one component of a multi-layered film. Like, you know, you have the directors, the writers, the crew, all these people who worked on this film. They just can't help that he had issues as the main character. Or they had issues. Sorry, I'm still working. I'll remember. It's tough. But I'm excited. You know, it's nice to feel excited again for a movie. And I'm with you, kind of like with, you know, jumping back, Wonder Woman 84, when it had all of its start and stop. By the time we got it, I felt like emotionally I was done before I even saw it. Because I'm like, you teased it here, then you pushed it back. You built my excitement up here, and you pushed it back. You built it again, and then you pushed it back. So I think there's that similar vein here. The only difference is it was all these false starts, and now we're here. You know, it's an ongoing joke I had that Ezra was announced to be the Flash the day after the TV series premiered, and here we are, the TV series is ending, and Ezra's film is finally coming out. So we'll see. You know, we'll touch base as it comes closer, but even more so, let's talk about the 90s. Now, I'll give you my history with the show, and I know you had never seen it, but what, if any, history did you have with this Flash property?
The most experience that I had with it, and I was thinking about this as I was watching it, and then thinking about our conversation that we're having now, at my old comic shop where I worked for many years, we would occasionally pop, the DVDs in and watch it on the TV at the store. But now when I say watch, it was more just kind of on in the background. So it is true. Until now, I had never actually sat down and like watched an entire episode from start to finish, but I had at least seen scenes and a few minutes here and there. So it wasn't completely foreign to me. So again, I knew of it. I owned the DVD because one of our beloved community members from my old comic shop, he gave me the DVD set years ago, and it had remained sealed until now. So I had seen bits and pieces of it at the store. I owned the DVD. And then I guess probably the most significant experience, not with the show itself, but with this version of the character, was through the Arrowverse and John Wesley Shipp coming back in the various roles that he played, including in Crisis, this actual version of Barry Allen. So like I said, I mean, it wasn't a complete blank space for me, but it was not something I had ever actually immersed myself in until I sat down and watched that 90-minute pilot.
Yeah, it's exciting to hear that, just because, like I said, it's fun to come to someone who hadn't seen it to experience it, especially as part of your fan journey as you dug into the George Reeves series, which, if our listeners don't know, he has a separate podcast and I've been on there. We're talking about the Adventures of Superman, so it's kind of fun to kind of see these different versions. My history with this is I watched it as a kid, but when I say I watched it, part of the history was it had a troubled past of being moved around and never finding its time slot. And that's part of what killed the series. But I remember parts of the pilot because I remember him running fast and I remember him eating all the pizzas. And then there's a later episode I won't spoil that really sunk into my brain and stayed with me. And I remember that Halloween I wanted to be the Flash really bad. And I don't remember what I ended up going as actually, because my mom was going to make me a Flash costume, but something happened. But I did have a shirt, and I got it from Kmart. It was it was like the Flash, the comic Flash, but it had the TV show logo, and it was like those, don't know if you're like puffy, so like it was raised, but it was an adult tank top. So it was like a small man's tank top, and I'm 5'5" at this time, so it was too big, but I had it, and it was exciting, and then the show just disappeared, and it wasn't until years later that when Solomon was born in 2015, I started buying a lot of physical media and stuff, and I was at Walmart one day when we were preparing for his birth, and they had the box set for $10. So I picked up the DVDs, and it was one of those shows that I watched straight through as one of those up with him. And, I did The Flash, and I did Birds of Prey, and I did the Superman the Animated Series, where these shows I just kind of had as I would be up with him at night to keep me entertained, to keep me engaged, and, I was up with him. So I had never got to really rewatch it until then, and it was an interesting experience, and I wanted to, do this and bring back that character and talk about it, and that's what we're here to do. So,
right on. No, I appreciate the opportunity to do this episode because this motivated me to finally crack open that DVD set and actually watch this, and it was really interesting. I mean, overall, I have to say, I genuinely enjoyed it. I don't.
And that was me
yeah, I mean, like,
that was me my next question. Like, what was your general feel?
Generally, I enjoyed it. It was again very interesting to see this early '90s attempt at bringing this character to the small screen, and of course, keeping in mind the context of this, right, on the heels of Batman '89. And
this is the year after.
Yeah, and you certainly see, I think, from the look to the music, certainly with Danny Elfman, you definitely see the influence of Batman '89, and just keeping in mind, like, we're still a few years away from Lois and Clark, so it occupies, I think, kind of a unique spot in all of this. So, but no, I enjoyed it. I mean, would I be tearing through the rest of those DVDs right now? Like, not necessarily. But it's something that I would definitely be open to going back to down the line. I did enjoy it.
The other thing we're going to review for this Flash is a Patreon episode where what we're doing is we're watching the two Trickster episodes kind of back to back as one movie. Because, it's Mark Hamill and the Trickster, which then, what's neat about that is that plays into later of being kind of this proto weird. He was the Trickster in the Flash, before the Flash, in the Arrowverse Flash. So it makes it very interesting. And I will admit that, one thing that was interesting about the Flash TV series as a whole is at first they tried to stay away from doing his villains. They stay away from supervillain type things until I think the Trickster's the first one. But then they eventually do a version of Mirror Master and, a couple others. So it's interesting, like you pointed out, we will say this premiered in September of 90. Batman '89 had come out the year before. This is very much a Flash that feels like it would line up with that universe. You have the color scheme, the feel. From a directing, they took a lot from Tim Burton. The music is done by Danny Elfman with Shirley Walker. Shirley Walker, who would go on to do the music for Batman the Animated Series. So you're seeing this kind of thing. And I was doing some digging. If it's interesting, they're like, we want to do another DC character. Well, Superman's, at this time is Superboy. 89, yeah. And so they decide to do The Flash and bring The Flash for the first major live action debut. And, I had to do some digging too, just certain things about the Flash history and canon. Like, technically this is 5 years after Crisis, but we all know that the comics move faster than the TV or movies do. So, I mean, we're getting movies now that's still pulling stuff from the 80s and the New 52, which was, 2011. So we're 5 years past Crisis. We're technically Barry Allen's dead, and Wally West is the Flash, but we're doing Barry Allen, first modern Flash. And I had to think to myself, like, his speed in this is done, differently. And I was like, wait, and I got thinking to myself, when did the lightning come into play? And it wasn't until later in Mark Waid's run with Wally West, and he introduced the Speed Force, when Barry started running and having the lightning. So in this, he's just running fast. There's no lightning. He's just quick. And I was like, okay. So I'm trying to take my comic book and place it, my comic knowledge into when this is going on. This is also so much. I would love to maybe one day do an episode with you. It'd probably have to be like a 4-parter of everything that Jeff Johns has done to comics that we now have cemented into our brain of a character's like legacy. Because sometimes there's things that pop up, or I'm like, wait, when did that happen? Oh, Jeff Johns did that. Oh, okay, I didn't know that. And of course, Flash and Hal Jordan being the two, I think, biggest ones, for example, especially, Barry with the whole Thawne retcon. We're so used to that, but that's not what this is.
I know that was one of the first things I was struck by watching this was this robust, happy, well, slightly dysfunctional, but overall intact home life and family that he has. And of course, we know what happens to his brother over the course of the pilot, but still, yeah, you're right, because the death of his mother, certainly a huge part of Flash Rebirth when Barry originally returned in the comics, and Flashpoint. And of course, it has been a driving force in the TV show for almost a decade. So yeah, it did definitely take a minute. But no, I mean, I agree with what you were saying. I was thinking about that too. And with both Flash and Superboy, the fact that we are now in the comics in this post-crisis era where Clark Kent was never Superboy before becoming Superman, and Wally West has now succeeded his predecessor as the Flash, yet these live-action depictions are adhering to that pre-crisis continuity. It's funny because in the case of Superboy, I get it. I mean, I understand why, and of course there was this long history of Superboy in the comics and everything. Not that Barry Allen didn't have a long history, but this ties in with the other thing that I was thinking about, which is before the show. I mean, what would people have known of the Flash? I mean, I feel like Super Friends was kind of it.
Super Friends, and then he appeared in a couple episodes of an early cartoon series that DC did, and then of course the Legend of the Superheroes little special that they did. Other than that, there's no Flash within the comics.
Yeah, so that's why. So I guess this kind of cuts both ways, because I part of me was like, well, it's not like the general audience knows Barry Allen per se, so it's like why not try to sync up with what's going on in the comics at the time? Could have been an early attempt at synergy. But on the flip side, yeah, I mean, it could just be that the creators had more affinity for Barry. Maybe they saw more of a path to, kind of an episodic weekly engine by having him in the crime lab, right? That opens up a lot, and he's investigating cases and things like that. Also, too, it's like if you bring in Wally, well, who was Wally inspired by? Who did Wally follow? Yeah. So like that opens up a whole thing. So in a lot of ways, I think it probably was cleaner and simpler to just stick with Barry. But I was thinking about that. It's like for people like the general CBS audience watching this in September 1990, it's like what of the Flash would they have possibly known other than maybe he's red and he's fast? I mean, I can't imagine that the average viewer knew much more than that.
It makes you wonder why they didn't do some sort of, like we've seen before, like amalgamation where like it's Barry's story, but we're going to call him Wally, because if someone goes and buys a Flash comic, it's going to be about Wally West. I mean, we're going to get in this episode, and we'll talk about, we get Linda Park.
Yeah. I know.
But so that's kind of our service. We'll dive into it now. We'll get to the Flash, and neither of us are huge experts on this, but we're just talking about it as we kind of go through the history of the media of where the Flash has appeared. And this being the first prominent live action appearance of this character. Because, but when you listen to this episode, you already have heard me rant about the Legends of the Superheroes and the horrible Justice League pilot that I put nobody. I did that myself so that no one else had to suffer with me to do that. It's rough. It's rough. So the pilot, is basically another example of a made-for-TV movie. It's like an hour and 30 minutes. And I say another example because that's what they tried to do. And this is kind of the first one with the Justice League of America series in 97. And this is what they tried to do too with Lois and Clark in 94 was 94, no, 93, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm about to say my 90 should get mixed up. Was you have this, in case the show doesn't work or doesn't get picked up, well, we have a made-for-TV movie that we can air and promote. And, that was a thing. Like, we don't see made-for-TV movies anymore. They usually just get dropped to a streamer, which is just weird to say out loud that we don't see made-for-TV movies anymore. But in my notes, I had to make sure I highlighted pre-Jeff Johns. We have it open that it is Barry's brother Jay's birthday. And, of course, Jay is an allusion to Jay Garrick. And I was like, I don't remember him ever having a brother other than the comics. But then I'm like, I haven't read a whole lot of pre-Crisis Flash. Like, I've been reading a lot of Flash, but it's been Mark Waid's Wally. And then, I finished reading all of Rebirth, all the New 52 Flash. But I don't have that much pre-Crisis. And we are introduced to the Allen family. And we have Henry, and we have Nora, and we have Jay. Jay's wife, whose name I didn't see. We have Barry's nephew, Sean, and then his girlfriend, Iris. The artist, Iris.
Yeah, a different take on Iris, and I was surprised to learn that she's written out of the show after the pilot.
Yeah.
I mean, I wasn't floored because I was aware of Tina McGee and that becomes the central relationships. I did know that, but I guess more so I didn't realize that Iris was in the pilot and then dropped after that. And yes, the fact that we have this Iris did not ring true to what I think of with respect to the character. She, they played her, they definitely went kind of in a younger, more immature direction. So much of the tension between the two of them, he wants to get married and settle down, and she's more of this free artistic spirit. And
it's the 90s, man. It's the 90s.
Yeah, but it's like she was there, so I guess I appreciate that. But yeah, I mean, it just didn't feel like any Iris that I would think of.
It's so weird how we get. I'm looking at you every version of live action Green Arrow, where we get the character. There's their main love interest, but somehow they give them somebody else who they just made up for the show or as another character that, so I get that. And I guess I don't know, but it's interesting when you see a show where the pilot is made and then by the time they get to the next episode, part of the subplot that was in the pilot is just dropped. And Iris being that she's written off and the show continues without her. And that's a big part of who Barry is. So they developed this Tina McGee relationship, which is interesting because, once again, Tina appears on Arrowverse Flash with some tweaks, but she's still Tina McGee. So it really helps kind of play with this is an alternate Earth.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I don't know the backstory why they decided to drop the character. Maybe they didn't like the way it played. Maybe they saw, because I mean, in watching the pilot, you definitely feel more of the chemistry between Barry and Tina. So maybe they saw that and were like, okay, this is the direction to go in.
Yeah, it makes complete sense. And I'm sorry.
I was just gonna say, did you find? So you going back to what you were saying before about the. Wondering if Barry ever had a brother in the comics. I was not aware. Did you find anything? Was there anything pre-Crisis?
I did it. I reached out to my buddy Brian because Brian's been reading all of DC Comics in chronological order for like the past several years. And it's just hilarious because he'll, like, irony is right now he is reading the new Krypton. And he's like making comments, and I'm like, he's like, have you read it? I was like, a little bit, but I'll be reading it soon by the end of the year. Like,
wait,
he's like, oh.
Wait, he started in 1938 and he's already at New Krypton?
Yeah, he's like I said, it's been, I think he started this journey when DC Universe started.
Wow.
Because he had the app, and he just started going through the chronology of what's there, and that's where he's been.
All right, wait. So, now, in fairness, now I don't mean to diminish what he's done at all. That is a towering achievement, and I tip my hat to him. But as we've talked about, and I've complained on my podcast a lot, there are a lot of gaps in that app. So it's so that makes things a lot clearer. But that's still a tremendous amount of material to get through. And
then he had to go back and do some when Ultra dropped for things that he might have missed that weren't on the app. So so anytime we talk about like stuff, like I'll reach out like, okay, you know, because he was doing a whole like really good look at where the comics were and then comparing it to like the comics are here. How is George Reeves here? You know, this is what the comics were when Chris took over as Superman and how it differs, and then how the comics changed to Chris's portrayal, you know. So it's been fun. So I reach out to him like, hey, what happened in post-crisis, you know? But as far as a brother, nothing came up. I might have missed it. You know, I didn't get to talk to him as much as I wanted to preparing for this episode. But it's interesting. What I found even more interesting is the fact that the Allens are all cops. But for some reason, Barry couldn't be a cop. He had to be the CSI. Even though the CSIs, and I feel like it's such a look at the 90s where the scientist is so like, nerd, working in the lab. Now we have like, what, 6 CSI shows?
Well, you know, it's funny, going back to Geoff Johns, I remember this when they announced and when they started publishing Flash Rebirth. Again, not the 2016 version, but the original version that brought Barry Allen back after his brief return in Final Crisis. And I remember Geoff Johns in interviews talking about how he really wanted to play up the CSI aspect, and how now, because like you said, of all of these shows and everything, and just the advancements in the field, it's like it's a much bigger thing now, and at least people have far more awareness of it. I think that's probably the biggest thing, and respect. And I was thinking about that in watching it. I was like, you know what? I mean, look, I have specific feelings about Geoff Johns bringing Barry back in the first place, and that's a separate conversation. But
yeah, it does. It's for that podcast we'll do in like 2 years about Geoff Johns.
Yes. But in watching this, I did say to myself, I was like, oh, he is right on that front, because yeah, you see this attitude towards Barry and the crime lab and the family in particular, like very dismissive. He's like the black sheep of the family because he's this crime lab technician and not a cop out on the street. And it's so funny. It's like, yeah, but again, this was 30 years ago.
Yeah, that right there is scary, just saying out loud.
33 years ago.
So, all right, we get the point, man. Okay, calm down. But dude, can we just say John Wesley's like 90s wardrobe is awesome? Like some of those outfits he's rocking is that point where it's just 90s enough, but not enough to be like awkward 90s, but like to be like, that looks good. Look, you know, turtlenecks and stuff, and but it just, to me, it was funny because he's like, I gotta get back to the lab. And then later when he shows up outside, they call in, you know, all the police and everything to investigate. And he shows up and the TV cameras, and this is where we are, Linda Park. She's like, Linda Park with the news. And they're asking questions, and he's like, I'm with the crime lab. And they're like, oh, cut. Like, they want nothing to do with, like, the people who build and gather the evidence, that analyze things, that help the detectives piece it all together. I was just kind of like, dang, that's very harsh. But we also meet Julio in this scene. Now, I got to think, like, Julio, I think, is a really cool character that I don't think they've ever introduced in the comics as far as I know.
Not that I'm aware of either. I mean, it's funny because it's like, I've read a lot of Flash, but the bulk of it has been Wally. Yeah. It was the Mark Waid run and the Geoff Johns run. And I've read some of the New 52 and Rebirth and Beyond Flat, but not a ton. And you know, I certainly remember, you know, Patty Spivot, for example, like she was in the mix and everything. But I don't know that this character ever made the leap. I love the actor, and of course he's done a bunch of stuff, and he was on Becker, for that run. But
Yep.
of course, the thing that I instantly think of is Boy Meets World, when he was the
Mr.
other
Turner's
young
friend.
teacher. Yeah,
He was the music teacher, wasn't he? Was he the music teacher?
I forget. I've been following Pod Meets World, the rewatch podcast, and I
have it. I'm just behind on it.
And just as a quick tangent, I was not rewatching along with them. I was just listening. And then, like a couple of weeks ago, I was sick and I was like, I wanted to put something on. And so I actually watched a bunch of the upcoming episodes. So now when I listen, I actually can kind of picture it more clearly, but I haven't gotten to that point. I think he comes in the following season of where they are right now. But, no, I love that guy. I think it's a cool character. I mean, I have no idea what sort of storylines they give him, what sort of role he serves in the rest of the season, but definitely was a welcome part of the pilot.
I was thinking like he would be like so many of these characters were introduced on these shows that they found ways to bring them into the comics. I'm like, this would be a really cool character to really give Barry a best friend who's not tied to superheroing. Because I've read a lot of, like I said, I read Flash Rebirth, the Jeff Johns, and then I read the New 52, Flashpoint, and then New 52, and then into like Rebirth, 2016's Rebirth. And that's been my biggest chunk of Barry flashing. I need to go back and read some other things. But Julio comes in that we see that they're going to work. They're going to work OT. He's like, that's a lot of OT, man. He's like, well, we got to do this. And we watch, and what's funny is Julio shows up with food, and he's like, Barry, you want some food? Barry's like, nah, man. He's like, why do I even bother? And Barry's like, you want my sandwich? He's like, yeah. He's like, that's why you bother. And then next thing it was like 3:30 in the morning. Barry's still going at it, and Julio's like, man, I'm out. And he's like, I'll see you in the morning. And I was just kind of like, what morning, dude? It is the morning. And it's like as soon as Julio leaves, Barry gets struck by lightning. I mean, it's like, because he's not even out the building. He turns around and Barry's on the ground. We get that great shot of him flying back into the chemicals, and we see the electricity moving through his body. And he's just laying there.
I gotta say a couple of things, building off of what you've just laid out. With Julio in particular, this ties into a larger positive feeling I have about the show, which is I do like how grounded it is. And I get what you're saying. It takes a while before they bring in more of the comic booky aspects and villains in particular. But, one of the things that grew very tiresome for me with the Flash TV show, and I've said this on various episodes, but, everyone is a metahuman, like everyone's on the team, everyone knows the identity. And it felt to me, and I eventually stopped watching, but it just kind of felt like, I know they're still dealing with interpersonal stories and things like that, but it just felt like it was all within this Star Labs, superhero world, and we were missing the more human grounded component. And so watching this, the family dynamics, the relationship business, Julio, like all of it just felt more real and grounded. And I really, really enjoyed that. So that was certainly a highlight. And then the whole, electric, the lightning strike and being bathed in the chemicals and everything. Again, I didn't really know what to expect going in, how faithful this would be, but you look at that scene and it's like, man, it's like right out of the comic. So I thought it was very, very, that aspect in particular was very well done.
Yeah, it was, because we're dealing with lightning and chemicals. We haven't introduced like the particle accelerator or any of that type to make him even faster, the Speed Force and all that. But what you were saying about the groundedness, and our listeners, this is a little update for a later episode. Jania rewatched the Flash 2014 pilot with me, and we talked about how one of my favorite parts in that is when you see Barry show up at the crime scene and he's examining things, you see like what's in his brain. Like as you see like formulas, almost like it's written in chalk, you see him measuring things, you see the machinations of him solving the crime as the CSI, which I think is great. But then it goes off to being just him and Star Labs. But then we can't make Barry too smart because we need this team instead, and we kind of diminish the character. And in this, we have Barry, who eventually will soon here be working with Tina, but they're kind of just the two of them. Tina, early person, early man in the chair, woman in the chair right there. I was thinking as I was watching, like, interesting. This whole person in the van on the comms. I'm like, yeah, well, we're so accustomed to now.
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't always want to make it about Smallville, but I can't help but think about my favorite show, and especially those early seasons. As much as I know, people complain about the Freak of the Week formula and all of that, but it's like that was just an engine for them. And when I think back on those first couple of seasons, it's like, and I don't really think about who Clark fought in various episodes, right? They were, that it was a vehicle to have some action and some outside tension. But what I think about the most were those moments with the Kents, between Clark and Lana in the barn, the foreshadowing of the doomed friendship between Clark and Lex, like all of those, the human moments and those interpersonal conversations and everything. And yeah, I feel like in the Arrowverse in particular and Flash, I just feel like they strayed from that. So again, in a lot of ways, even though this 1990 Flash show is, of course, far more limited in terms of what it could bring forth on screen, I think they did a solid job showing the super speed. I think in that respect, Flash makes sense as a choice for this kind of show, because it's like, okay, you can achieve, super speed reasonably well enough. But yeah, I mean, like that whole piece of it, I think really was a highlight.
I like that. And the next piece is where he's in the hospital after being struck by lightning, and the actor, I think it's Emmett, I had it written down, who plays Henry Allen, who's one of those actors you've seen in a ton of things. I just was like, he's almost goofy, and I'm trying to be goofy kind of way. He's yelling like, "Let me see my son," and Barry's already up out of the hospital bed. Like, "I'm good, I'm fine." And then he meets Iris for lunch, like right after the hospital. And I'm like, you got struck by lightning, man.
I know. It's like on the current Flash show, he's in a coma for months. It's like here he's just up and going about his day. Well, listen.
I mean, so it was just kind of interesting because we see like the family and how they're working. And what we find out, Iris is having a gallery because she's an artist, and Barry's going to be there, And so we haven't even talked about like the protagonist. We talked about our protagonist. We haven't talked about our antagonist. And the antagonist is this rival biker gang led by Pike. It's this motorcycle gang that have this cool like blood spot on their back for their symbol. And I'm not going to dive into it too much, but Pike is an ex-Central City Police motorcycle officer who Jay actually betrayed, or vice versa kind of thing. He believes that Jay betrayed him and everything, but he's like leading this gang. And I have in my notes like, oh, so his hideout is the same as the hideout for the Foot Clan and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. It's just a warehouse with all these people hanging out, And we have this scene where this guy like trying to escape with his girlfriend, and she tells Pike that he's going to run away and took all this money, which was just $300. I'm going to get them out of town and set them up for a little bit.
That made me laugh because it's like, look, yes, as we've established, this was over 30 years ago. So, all right, $300 would get you further than it would today. But still, it's like even in 1990s terms, like that's still not that much, especially to get two people out of town and set them up with new lives. And on top of that, just how proudly he's flashing it. It's just like, that made me laugh. Because he pulls out this like huge wad of bills, and he's like, "This is our ticket out of here." And you figure, all right, maybe it's like a couple $1,000s. And he's like, "I had $300."
I have a rule about screenwriting and everything: never say an amount.
Yeah.
My favorite example of this is in the movie White Christmas, when Bing Crosby asked the guy like, "How much is this going to cost me?" And the next part, he just goes, "Wow." And then Danny Kaye is like, "How much is wow?" And he's like, "How much is wow?" And Bing Crosby responds, "It's right between ouch and boing." And he's like, "Wow." No amounts given, but we have an idea that's going to cost a lot, and we can put our own kind of number on it. And it's just so much more effective, because then you have these conversations like, 300.
Yeah, no,
That's
for
like
sure.
what, two nights at a hotel? Like, if you're lucky.
Yeah, it keeps it a lot more timeless when you don't put the number on it, because no matter when people are watching it, whatever's a lot of money at that point in time, like that's what you're imagining. So no, I think that's the better way to go. So that was unintentionally comical, but you know, it's funny. We're starting to talk about Pike and the gang now, but you know, that's where the pilot opens with the gang, you know, riding through the streets and you know, Central City is like this hellscape. It's like under the thumb of this biker gang. Again, very Tim Burton, Batman-esque in terms of this world that they're creating. And I also have to say, man, this was such an unexpected delight. Random connection. So the actor who plays Pike, Michael Nader, I think is his name.
I would go with that. It sounds right.
So when I was a kid, my mom watched All My Children, the soap opera. So that meant that on occasion I would watch the soap opera All My Children. And that actor played a character named Dimitri on the show, who was a love interest for Susan Lucci's Erica Kane. And so I knew this guy. So, you know, when he popped up on screen, I'm like, oh, it's that guy.
You're all excited. Like, yes, I know him.
Yeah, it was what a random connection. But yeah, I thought he did a great job. I liked him in this role.
He's very effective. And I bring up the guy in the $300 because they do this thing where he talks about, you know, in Japan during the Mongols' reign, Genghis Khan, an unloyal person would be tied to a horse and the horse would be set free. So they tie him backwards to his motorcycle and just send him down a tunnel with like a green ball that explodes. And I'm like, I don't know how effective that would be, you know, but whatever.
I also don't know that it was that necessary to just like toss away a bike like that.
Yeah, I'm like, you could have just like, you know, shot him, you know, save money, save a bike, save an explosion inside your tunnel in your base fortress. But whatever, you know. But what we have found out, the next big thing is like Barry's doctor recommends Star Labs for him, and he's upset because like I didn't authorize this, and we're gonna find out he's gonna go to Star Labs, but he takes his dog Earl for a walk, and we get this great thing where Earl's like pulling him and Barry's like walking, and then all of a sudden Barry's running and it's, you know, just sped up, and he's into the bushes. Nobody notices this, but Earl does. And I love when they have the continuity of the Flash has to eat a lot. You know, it's one of those things they had like an episode in the Flash series, like the second episode of 2014's, they already had to create some special thing that they create for him to eat, so he's like a high calorie bar. But I love in this how we see how much he eats everything in his house. And then he's like sitting there like, Earl, you want some chicken? Like he's like, I can't believe I'm still hungry. Like he just keeps eating. And I always find that such simple built-in humor that I wish that they would take more. Like I feel like that's a scene that's kind of alluded to in Justice League or either version, because we see Barry eating the pizza, talking about being a snack hole. And then he gets to the Batcave with Alfred. He's like, I'm kind of hungry. Like, I feel like that was just, we should have just had him eating like the whole time, just something in his hand. But when he gets, what we have next is he runs, the big thing is he runs to Crystal Beach, you know, and he says, we find out he's just out. He goes to catch a bus. He's a flat tire to go to Iris's gala. And next thing you know, he's in Crystal Beach, 30 miles away. You know, this is one of those scenes that I remember as a kid because, like, his clothes are all torn.
Yeah.
And, you know, he tries to call Iris, like, hey, I don't know how I got here. Will you come get me? She just hangs up on him. And he's trying to figure out what. And that's why when he gets to Star Labs, he's already like, okay, something's going on with me. Please help me. And how did you feel about just the whole, like, the effects, the running, and everything that we get?
I thought it worked well for the time, for what it was. The torn clothes. I know it, you know, it definitely creates an impression, but you know, it tracks at least.
My favorite is the shots of like POV running fast.
Yes.
how he's perfectly running on a road or a sidewalk. You know, like, oh, I'm glad he, you know, respects, you know, the same pathways that a car could drive, recording this footage to be played back later at faster speed, you know, faster frame rate to make it seem like it's going faster. So good job on that, Flash.
Yeah. No, I was, you know, that's the thing. And it's funny too, is whether we're talking this or Lois and Clark or Adventures of Superman, as I've been going back and looking at these older things, I never really have an issue with, again, any limitations in terms of the production, the technology, the effects, because, you know, you recognize the time in which they did it. And I feel like more often than not, I just come away thinking, wow, it's actually pretty incredible that they were able to pull that off. It's, you know, it tends to be story things that I kind of bump up against. I'm like, oh man, you guys couldn't have figured out something better than that. But as far as
Lois eating frogs.
Oh my God. That was a fun discussion we had, but yeah, man.
Yeah, it was, but yeah.
But rough material.
I completely agree with you, because that's how I feel. Like, even watching, you know, 2014's Flash and certain early episodes with the CG's kind of a little, I'm like, you know what, I just let it go, because they're trying to do the best they can with what they have. And I'm just happy I have this compared to being super critical of the limitations. Just enjoying, you know. But we do get Tina calls Barry, tells her to meet him at Garrick Avenue. And you know, it's a really great interaction when he meets her, because we have this like almost meet cute of them being like, you're not what I expected. You know, she comes walking in, very 90s fashionable. And she's like, well, you're not what I expected. And we find out she's the only person at Star Labs, because somehow Star Labs is always underemployed, understaffed. Really good backstory.
Yeah, I know.
but they have these government contracts and everything. And we learn that her husband died in an experiment that he ended up running on himself, because they wanted to do human testing and he didn't want to do that. And so that's kind of like Tina's backstory, is she's now the only person working at Star Labs. And then when you get the obligatory, the Flash is going to run to be tested, and she hooks him up, you know, we see the suit. It's kind of this red suit, and he's talking about how he feels like it's connecting to his muscles and he can feel it. And she's like, well, that's what the suit's supposed to do to help with all the stuff that, you know, he would need. And he takes off running, and she's monitoring him. And I wrote it down, but the first time he runs is on a treadmill. He gets to 347 miles per hour. And I kind of skipped over this part because I had it backwards in my brain. But Tina takes him to eat, and he eats like 10 large pizzas.
Yeah, I know. And even the waiter gives him a little sass. Just another pizza.
You know, and Barry's like, I feel like he says like, I feel gross. Like, is this disgusting? And she's like, no, like, you're burning lots of calories. Like, I get it. As a scientist, it's not like he's eating disgustingly. He's just eating a lot, you know, and his blood sugar has to stay up. And I really feel like this is the only episode that focuses on that. It always stuck out to me, this whole Flash thing about his blood sugar. And then as episodes go on, they kind of release that a little bit. But the next day he's running, and Tina says, you're getting like 500 miles per hour and all this, and you're going to create a sonic boom. And then he picks her up and he runs with her. And it's great because like as he's running, her shirt starts ripping, the sleeves are ripping off and everything. And then he's like, I wanted to give you, you know, a chance of seeing what it's like. It was 570 is what I have.
Yeah, I mean, it's fun, you know, like we talk about with the, you know, with the dollar amount, and, you know, similarly here to actually put a number, you know, on the speed. It's like, it doesn't, I mean, I know that's a staggeringly high number, but for the Flash, it doesn't really feel that fast. Like when we think about, you know, in the comics and then the recent show, it's like, oh, he's running at the speed of light. So, you know, 500 miles an hour doesn't really sound like that crazy. But again, like I like the more grounded, more modest, you know, power set. I'm totally fine with that. And it's funny too, when, you know, they show up at the track again, we saw the same scene play out in the current TV show as well. So it was, again, cool seeing these parallels. And yeah, I mean, I think again, we see it as viewers, and presumably the producers notice this as well. But, you know, once Barry and Tina, you know, sync up like that, and they just feel more like peers. and equals.
Simpatico.
Yeah, and again, in a way that it definitely doesn't with Iris, and it's funny because I looked up, I think, how old John Wesley Shipp was at the time, and I don't know, was it like mid-30s or something at this time, early to mid-30s? I mean, so I don't know, exactly the age difference between the actors, but like it just, and again, I know obviously part of what they were going for was that he was ready to settle down and she wasn't, so it tracked that she played younger, but I don't know. I think they maybe overshot a little bit on that. Like it just, again, I can understand why they ended up dropping that character in relationship.
They were like, yeah, this Tina character, that's where we're going to put our money. But it's right after this that he gets a radio in about the motorcycle gangs attacking. Jay's leading this task force that's being presented. The mayor's going to present the task force that's going to take down this motorcycle gang. And basically, this is where Pike shows up. They shoot it up, and they kill Jay. And that's when we find out, like, Jay was the one that was against Pike, that got Pike off the force. And Barry shows up too late. He runs to find his brother. When he finds out, we get a great howling, no, as Barry stands holding his brother. Like, one thing is, his brother looks significantly older than him. At least, I mean, you'd almost cast the brother to be the dad.
Right.
Like, the brother the brother's like, we have young, physically fit, John Wesley Shipp, brown hair, not blonde like Barry Allen.
We can never get a blonde Barry Allen, apparently.
No, we can't. We can't. It's not allowed. And then we have his brother who's like completely gray. And, it almost like that kind of been built into the family dynamic story that maybe, for lack of a better term, kind of foreshadowing that Barry was an accident, an accidental surprise. The idea that he's an accident and the accident makes him, kind of this, that why there's this age gap, because even his dad seems even older than what you would think, Barry's dad would be. And that it's never brought up, but as I was just thinking, like as a writer, like that would be something that's interesting, like this dynamic that everyone's much older than him, so that's why they coddle Barry like a baby, and that's why he's like, you have to be the crime, you have the brains, not Later at the grave, the dad says, I never made it past sergeant, but your brother could have been chief or anything he wanted to be in the police force.
What did you think about killing off Jay? Because we talked about how Jeff Johns inserted the death of Barry's mother and made it part of the origin story, and of course has been a driving factor now on the TV show and the DCEU. Like, this is now kind of an ingrained part of the character that Barry's mother is killed and his father is blamed for it, and Barry has to deliver justice for both of them. So here it was funny because, again, I did not know how this pilot was going to play out. I mean, I had a feeling pretty early on that things probably weren't looking good for Jay, but when it started, like I was saying before, I was like, oh, this was very, refreshing, that it's like, oh, it's not that his mom's dead and this and that. It's like, oh, like he has this intact family unit. So, because again, and we've talked about this, not every character needs to be driven by
tragedy,
that tragedy, that guilt, that quest for retribution. It works great for Batman, for Spider, but it's like not every character has to have that. That's one of the issues that I have with Jeff Johns. Is like he takes over Barry Allen, takes over Hal Jordan, and all of a sudden now, like, these are ingrained
Jeff Johns hates
of their
parents.
origin.
He's like, if you're a parent, you're gonna die.
I mean, essentially. So, I was pleasantly surprised at the start of this, and then it's like, oh, okay. But so now we still have the death of a family member. So, I mean, like, how did you feel about it?
I agree, because I feel like Barry, in a lot of ways, like they always say Superman's hope, but at the same time, I think Barry Allen in the comics also represents a different kind of hope and brightness. And sometimes in the comics, they go back between Barry and Wally, but they both kind of represent the light, the on the streets boots hero that people identify with. And he doesn't have to be birthed from tragedy, And if I hadn't already known what was going to happen, I could see me thinking like Jay's going to be the police officer
froze.
So that's kind of what I was thinking. But I knew where it was going to go because I'd seen it before. But at the same time, like, that would have been kind of interesting. Like, this new vigilante hero type, and I feel like vigilante, they don't really use the term because it's a different time. They weren't thinking that. But, Jay dies and Barry goes, he eventually figures out, using like where the tire tracks and everything is, where Pike and then Barry asked Tina to make him a hood and gloves. And then he's like, they have their symbol, I have mine. He shows his homemade drawing of a lightning bolt. And then the next scene, like, we see the full-on costume. And I had to chuckle because, like, she made a hood. She made gloves, but then she went ahead and made him a lightning belt, little things around the gloves, and the ears, built-in earpieces that, this whole aesthetic. It just kind of made me chuckle because, like, that's things like, I think Batman Begins kind of ruined everything for us about how, like, everything is important to the superhero costume and how it has to be, like, where it comes from. And, back then you just rolled with it. You're like, whatever.
Yeah, put some flair on it. What I mean, do you like this costume, this look?
Yeah, I mean, the belt straight up Wally West's belt, because Barry's was always the circle and Wally always had more of like the V. I like the suit. I mean, it makes complete sense for the 90s. You just came from the Batman 89 where, like, it was a muscular suit that was built in. I do think it's interesting they did the choice to do the full red boots and not the yellow boots. So that, and we have the Flash show up, like, with full on costume. He attacks the gang. It's a great fun. We're now like in, we're like about at the 50-minute mark as far as if you're looking at like the pilot of him actually showing up. The police find 6 of the bikers they can never catch. They now have 6 thanks to this ghost or demon. And it was fun because we're here and Barry's going after Pike's group. He's Iris breaks up with him because she needs space. And I felt bad for him. But he's on his quest to avenge Jay, and Tina's helping what she can, following him around in her van. We get a great scene of Barry walking around, and his blood sugar drops, and the police see him like, Alan, he steals somebody's clothes. That's what cracked me up. And the cop, the one cop that's in the car with him, would later be the mayor on the Flash show, the current Flash show.
Oh, I didn't make that connection. Oh, that's cool.
Because Berlanti worked as like an assistant or like a flunky on this original show. So he's always been a fan of the character, and he's, known these people. That's why there's so much references to this Flash in the new Flash.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, I appreciate that even more now that I have a little bit more context for this 90s show. But even before that, one thing that I definitely appreciate, even though it didn't have as much personal significance for me, but, having John Wesley Shipp there generally, but especially in Crisis when he was playing the Flash of Earth 90 and he makes his sacrifice in Crisis. And, we see a clip of his, of a scene with Tina from the pilot of the show. And again, even there, I appreciate it for fans of that show to have that degree of closure for a show that just got canceled was really, really special and cool. And that's why I know you and I have talked about this, but it's like, I wish that Crisis could have given us something similar for the Lois and Clark, the New Adventures of Superman characters. Cause again, same thing there. And that ran for 4 years and they got canceled on a cliffhanger. It's like, man, it would have been really nice and satisfying to kind of get even just like a 30-second thing where you get some kind of button on those versions of the characters.
My thing was the scene where it's the death of Superman. Like, that could have been Dean Cain and Terry Hatcher.
Yeah.
And that would have worked because of the time frame and everything. And the fact that you could have, the way that scene was in the episode of Crisis, they could have filmed them separate and then composited the shot together. It's just Lois over him laying there. I mean, it would have been so easy to film. But, and what's neat is that scene is in this pilot.
Yeah.
It's him and Tina finally kind of coming together where he admits that they're going to work together. And she's like, on board with it. And it was kind of exciting because I forgot where that scene was in the original show, but it is here in the pilot. And basically what happens is Barry learns, he tries to get the police to go in and raid Pike's lair. Barry learns that they're going to go and bust all these criminals out of jail. We get this great scene of Pike on his motorcycle rolling through the jail. And Barry shows up. He disarms the Pike's men are shooting at the cops from inside the jail. Of course, they're more well-armed than the police are. Flash zooms in, takes out their guns, punches a bunch of people. He pushes things and runs away. And we get a great shot of him on the roof with like fog, very, Batman Burton era. And he defeats Pike by basically spitting him in a tornado and taking him up, sucking the oxygen, and then they arrest him. And, it's a very fun, climactic, Flash battle. My kids walked in at that part. They were going to watch it with me, but then they're like, nah, we're going to go play. But, at the end where he's actually in costume doing stuff, they were a little bit more interested. And, at the episode comes to a closure where Julio, he's back, been absent for a while, is at the Allen home. They're having dinner again, which is kind of a bookend to where the episode began with the Allens all at home. And they're like, where's Barry? And they're talking about the ghost, the demon or whatever. And Barry's outside talking to his nephew. And he's basically like telling his nephew, I miss your dad too. But if you ever need me, I'll be there in a flash. And it's a very nice way of like bringing that story and like how, and I don't know if they wanted, some like the nephew to kind of be this parallel to like what Wally would be or something, like what their farther, down the road game was or something to make a kid Flash. But it's a really good pilot. It's also really good if you just look at it as a made-for-TV movie. And it hits all the beats that you need for an origin, all the, the action beats and everything. But yeah, and Tina agrees that she's going to help Barry because Barry's like, I want to keep doing this. I want to help people. And she's like, okay, I want to help you. And, she gave him a whole speech about, I want to help you for you, not because if anyone else found out about you, like the government's going to take you away or do this to you. So it really sets up, like you said earlier, the engine for the series. But any final thoughts, closure, points you want to articulate on? I don't want us to run too long,
No pun intended. No, it was to your point, I think it was satisfying. Like I said, I don't know how likely I will be to make my way through the rest of the episodes, at least anytime soon. But I feel like I now do have a good sense of this iteration of the character and this show. And that, TV movie pilot really did a great job. The other thing is, for years, like I've seen and heard the names Bilson and DeMeo, like the showrunners of this. And it was only in the past couple of years that I made the connection and realized that Danny Bilson is father of Rachel Bilson from the OC and a bunch of other things. So
I just figured that out just now.
Yeah, so that's a fun connection. But I really I enjoyed this. Like I said, I thank you for the opportunity to come on and talk about it and for the motivation to watch it. I guess the last thing I'll say is, while I did enjoy it, I can also see maybe why this only ran one season. I guess I just sort of wonder what, again, like the average viewer would think of something like this, and I don't have an answer to this, but how closely it calls to mind the Burton Batman movies. Like, I don't know. On the one hand, was that familiarity appealing to audiences, or was it kind of, or was it a negative, especially if the general public didn't have that connection to the Flash, and so they're just seeing like another superhero that's kind of trying to be like that awesome Batman movie that we all love, but isn't. I don't know how that kind of ultimately landed.
Yeah, I agree. Like it's I would recommend for you, go watch the 2 Trickster episodes. just to see how that plays out. It's farther in the series and getting to see Mark Hamill. There's also something else I want to see you see in it, but I won't tell you what it is till after you watch it.
Okay.
So after you watch it, just shoot me a message because I'll point something out to you. And then the episode that I really liked was, I had it written down. It's the one with Pollux. That's all I'm going to say. I'll look it up and I'll send it to you. But
All right.
I want to thank you for joining us for today's episode of Flash Week. And I look forward to other conversations with you down the line. So thanks. Give everyone a quick shout out of where they can find you.
Sure. So I host a number of podcasts, Digging for Kryptonite, another exciting episode in the Adventures of Superman, and Summoning the Zords. And they're available on all major podcast platforms. So wherever you listen, they're there. You can also watch them on YouTube. And for everything, including my documentary projects and social media handle, all that stuff, if you go to flatsquirrelproductions.com, everything's linked there. So I appreciate anyone who checks out any or all of those shows.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Anthony, for being here. We appreciate it. And to all of our listeners, remember,
Look up in the sky.
We just want to say, if you've enjoyed this podcast, please check out other podcasts on the Press Play Podcast Network. We're going to press pause and hear a few words from our other podcasts on Press Play Podcast Network.
Hello, Brooks here with the Books with Brooks monthly book club podcast. Here's how Books with Brooks works. We read one book a month, and then we talk about it. Classics like Stephen King's The Shining, debut novels like We Are the Brennans by Tracy Lang, and tons of other compelling, life-changing stories, one book and 1 month at a time. So come read along with us, and then listen in.
If you are like Tyler and James and can't get enough Super Talk, check out these other podcasts. Digging for Kryptonite, Supergirl Radio, The Last Sons of Krypton, the Superboy Legacy Podcast, All-Star Superfans, Superman the Animated Podcast, The Aspiring Kryptonians, Always Hold On to Smallville, The Geek of Steel, and Truth, Justice, and Hope.
Remember to check out Krypton Report on all social media platforms. Go to linktree.com/Krypton Report. You find all of our reports.
This is Dan Jurgens, and if you want to have a good time, keep listening to the Krypton Report.